Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second of three lectures delivered by Hava Tirosh-Samuelson on modern Jewish philosophers. On March 5th, please join us for a third lecture, which will focus on the thought of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former Chief Rabbi of England. I'm Stanley Mervis, the Director of Jewish Studies and the Grossman Chair of Jewish Studies at ASU. Jewish Studies at ASU serves as a resource for exploring the Jewish experience in all of its dimensions, including history, language, religion, and thought. Our degree program, certificate, and courses bring that scholarship into the classroom. Our public programs, such as this one, bring that same scholarship into the wider community and to audiences around the world. These programs are free and open to everyone, regardless of background or identity, and are made available online shortly after each event. I'd now like to introduce my esteemed colleague, Hava Tirosh-Samuelson, is a Regents Professor of History and Irving Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism at Arizona State University. She served as Director of Jewish Studies at Arizona State for nearly 17 years. Before joining the faculty of ASU in 1999, Tirosh-Samuelson taught at Hebrew Union College in New York from 1980 to 1982, Columbia University, Emory University, and Indiana University. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Outstanding Young Faculty Award at Indiana University, the Distinguished Alumna Award of Stony Brook University, and the Gary Crayenbull Difference Maker Award of Arizona State University in 2024. A Jewish intellectual historian, Tirosh-Samuelson writes on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, religion, science, and technology, Judaism and ecology, and feminism and gender. In addition to over 70 essays and book chapters, she is the author of the award-winning Between Worlds, The Life and Thought of Rabbi David ben Yehuda Messer Leon, Happiness in Premodern Judaism, Virtue, Knowledge, and Well-Being, and Religion and Environment, The Case of Judaism. She is also the editor of 8 volumes and serves as editor-in-chief of the Library of Contemporary Jewish Philosophers, a series of 21 books featuring outstanding contemporary Jewish thinkers. Tirosh-Samuelson is the recipient of over $3.5 million in external grants, which funded conferences, workshops, and public lectures, and publications on religion, science, and technology, and on various aspects of the Jewish historical experience. A nationally and internationally renowned scholar, she has served on the boards of the Association for Jewish Studies and Zygon, the Journal of Religion and Science, and is the Fellow of the International Society of Science and Religion. In 2008, she was among the founding members of the International Jewish Science and Medicine Group and has organized and managed the annual conference for the past 16 years. So without further ado, please welcome Professor... Okay, one more point. For those of you on Zoom, please put your questions into the Q&A section, and we will feature them at the end. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tirosh-Samuelson.
Thank you. Okay, so wonderful to see you all, and welcome to everybody online. This is our lecture series. Come in, take a seat. This is our series of contemporary Jewish philosophers, and you can see that there is the Latin number 2. Why is that? That's because this is the second year that we've been doing it. Last year, the first time I introduced 3 philosophers. I chose Arden Buber, Joseph Soloveitchik, and Mordechai Kaplan. And I mention this because it will be relevant a little bit to the lecture today. The lecture today is on Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. And if you were with us last time, you know that we focused on Emil Fackenheim. So before I get to saying a few words, I want to start by kind of talking a little bit more generally. What's the purpose of the lecture series? Why am I doing it? And I think it's important to keep in mind that we have terrific thinkers among our midst, in the Jewish community, primarily in the United States, but not only in the United States. And my sense is that people are not sufficiently familiar with them. So there are great thinkers, and people either don't read them anymore, maybe they used to read them in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, but now people just don't know enough. So the purpose of offering this lecture series is to familiarize people with the great creativity, I think, that is going on in the Jewish community. I also want to, at least I hope and I intend to inspire in people who listen to me, either in person or online, to learn more about Jewish philosophy. Not just Jewish philosophy today, but Jewish philosophy through the ages. So as a Jewish intellectual historian, that's kind of part of my purpose, to introduce people to Jewish thought. And I believe that this material is of interest to Jews as well as to non-Jews. And I really believe that Jewish philosophy matters. That's one of the things that I will try to kind of inculcate in all of you in this lecture series. So my methodology, to those who have not been here before, I'm an intellectual historian, which means that I pay attention to the people who do philosophy. I don't just talk about ideas as if ideas are somewhere in the cloud, so to speak, but I always talk about ideas in context. They are people, they studied in specific institutions, they received specific kind of training, specific kind of education, and I try to bring all that. That's very relevant to understanding the ideas of the people, okay? So I'm an intellectual historian. I also want to remind everybody who listens to us today that when we talk about philosophers, we have to engage philosophers critically. We don't have to necessarily accept everything they say, because they too didn't do it. They were very critical in their approach. So you will see this is not a situation in which I say, well, this philosopher is the best, or this thinker is the number one, whatever, but rather I introduce ideas. I do it from an historical perspective, paying attention to the social cultural context, and hopefully making sense. What's my hope? My hope is that every person who listens to individual lectures or to the entire series, it will start buying books of those people. At least buy one book after each lecture. That would be a great success. Of course, today I'll tell you two books which I think are worthy to be in your library if you're interested in Schachter-Shalomi, Rabbi Schachter-Shalomi. I also think that all synagogues should have libraries. And libraries, you know, today are kind of becoming old-fashioned stuff. But I really believe that, I hope so, because that's part of who I am, that people will be more engaged in this kind of material. So that's about the lecture series, and maybe if people are interested, I will definitely be very happy to do it next year as well. So last time we spoke about Emil Fackenheim. I know that this is a little bit harder for you to see from afar, it's a little bit tight. The script may be a little bit too small, but just to contextualize, to create a continuity between last time and this time, I started with Emil Fackenheim, who was a German Jewish philosopher associated with the Reform movement. But basically, the whole project of his life is, in a sense, is to make sense of the Holocaust. So I'm not going to review what I said last time, but the point is that we cannot, in the second half of the 20th century, we cannot speak about Jewish philosophy or Jewish thought or Jewish theology or Jewish spirituality without saying something about the Holocaust. So that's one primary reason why I started with Fackenheim. I also wanted to suggest to you that certain themes that he already identified will be with us through this lecture series. In some ways, you can look at Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi as a response to the issues that were raised already by Fackenheim. In many ways, he's doing the kind of mending the world that Fackenheim was talking about when we talked about it last time. But he does it in a very different way than Fackenheim. So it's very important to see connections. Next time, you will see, I'm going to start next time the lecture on Rabbi Sachs, when Rabbi Sachs critiques Fackenheim. He's actually saying that he stands against everything that Fackenheim said or did. It is really quite amazing paragraphs that I will share with you next time. That's from his book, Future Tense. So we're going to look today at this very famous person. Everybody in the room is familiar with the name Zalman Schachter-Shalomi? Most people say yes, but not necessarily, right? Not everybody knows him. Okay, so Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, I'll tell you a lot about, but he's associated with the Jewish Renewal movement. Actually, it's very hard to kind of identify him. You'll see next slide how many aspects this person had. So he's a very rich and interesting and quite different from Fackenheim. But at least you will have some vision of what he looked like. And of course, there are many more available online, so you can Google him online and see. So how do I, kind of by way of introduction, how to make sense of him? It's actually not easy. I put some of the words that come to my mind when I think about Rabbi Schachter-Shalomi as a kind of in the totality of his life. So I put the word mystic or Kabbalist. I could have used the word Kabbalist. He's also Chassid. That's the one after it. But basically, there's a strong mystical dimension here. You cannot understand what he's about and what his project was without thinking about Kabbalah, thinking about Hasidism, and understanding mysticism as a kind of an experience. So I'll tell you more about that. But mysticism, Hasidism, that's very much part of what Rabbi Schachter-Shalomi was about. He's also a spiritual leader, and that's the interesting thing, that even though he's very mystically inclined, he created institutions. He created, settings that enable Jews to be Jews in a new way, in a way that he promoted. Shall we call it Neo-Hasidism? You'll see it in a minute. But basically, he also was an organizer and a person who really influenced a lot of people. So last time I showed you, for example, two scholars who were continuing the path of Fackenheim and wrote about Fackenheim. Here we are not talking about 2 or 3 or 4 people. We are talking about hundreds and thousands of people who were influenced by Schachter-Shalomi. He was a professor of religious studies, but he was not a typical professor of religious studies, even though he was a professor in religious studies in Temple University for 2 decades or so. Nonetheless, he's not a regular or ordinary professor of religious studies. All that will make sense as we go. He created institutions. I'll show you all that. He's mainly a teacher and interpreter of Judaism for, I would say, the post-Holocaust age. So in a sense, Schachter-Shalomi enables Jews to be Jewish despite the rupture of the Holocaust. And he himself experienced the Holocaust, as you'll see in a minute. He was also very big on pastoral counseling. That has a lot to do with his Hasidism, but also has to do with some of his training. And he had a lot to say about environmental issues. In many ways, you can look at him as an environmental visionary, ecological visionary. He understood the problem of the ecological crisis that we are facing. All this is coming. So if I'm going to say one word about him at the end, I think the rubric at the very bottom, sage, is probably the best way to understand what he was about and why was he so influential. And I really believe that his influence is way beyond what a normal or ordinary professor of religious studies could, aspire to. So the first question that I have to pose to myself is, why did I include him? It's not obvious that he should be included in this conversation of Jewish philosophy. Was he a philosopher? It's a big question. Let's start with the argument against first. So he's not like Fackenheim. He didn't have a PhD in philosophy. Okay? He didn't study at the university focusing on philosophy. He did end up in the university, but not in philosophy, in more psychology of religion and pastoral counseling. He did not write like a philosopher. Philosophers, especially if you're trained in the analytic tradition, you write in an argumentative manner. You always have arguments to advance, and there's a certain set of problems, a certain set of scholarship that you have to familiarize yourself with. He didn't engage all that. So technically speaking, he's not really a philosopher Definitely not like Fackenheim, and not even like Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs started philosophy in Cambridge and then in Oxford. So it's not that kind of training. And he taught primarily through stories, through sometimes it's in an exposition of other stories, or stories written either by the rabbis or by Hasidic masters. But the storytelling is very important to the way he thought that we need to think, okay, or we need to express ourselves. So he's not really a philosopher in the ordinary sense of the term. And nonetheless, I think that he does belong in this series. And he had a lot to say about religious philosophy. His religious philosophy, again, is not systematic. You'll see in a minute in another slide how many intellectual resources were available to him, and he put it all together. So he's he's much more eclectic. He is much more open-ended in a sense, or open to influences from a variety of resources. And basically, he's telling us that philosophy does not have to be done the way it's done at the university. There are other ways of doing the business, so to speak. And either you do it midrashically, you interpret a biblical text, or you tell a story about an individual, about Hasidic masters, or you explicate Hasidic ideas, let's say, in a way that makes sense, but it's not the way that people will do in a philosophy department. And if you remember the lecture from last time, I suggested to you that Jewish philosophy is least, and where would you find it? You're not going to find it in philosophy department in American universities. It's really a problem. What's the place of Jewish philosophy in an American university? And it's not an easy or simple place. So the bottom line is that the focus here is going to be on lived experience, on emotions, on thought, but not in a systematic way. So I believe that he and other people like him, and you'll see, I'll tell you at the end who he influenced. So there's a lot of material, there are a lot of other people who follow his approach, but it belongs here. So in some ways, what I think is unique about Schachter-Shalomi is that he's telling us to move beyond either-or thinking. It's not either-or. It's not either you're a philosopher or you're a religious person. It's not either you are about logos, that's thought, or about mythos, that's the story. So it's not either or. What he's trying to share, I think, or inspire us to think is in a much more integral way. So the word integral appears in his writing quite a lot. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit more who influenced him in that regard. But the point is that he includes stuff. He's a very inclusive thinker. Most philosophers are actually they're not about inclusion, they're about differentiation. They're about, this is correct, this is incorrect, this is a bad way of saying it, this is a better way of saying it. He doesn't think like that. He's much more inclusive. So it's the paradigm of Athens versus Jerusalem, that goes back to the 3rd century statement by Tertullian, a church father, said, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? That's another way of saying, what does philosophy have to do with monotheistic tradition? And Schachter-Shalomi is going to show, no, it's very much both. It's not either or, but it's both and. So you get this point. The last one is kind of universality versus particularity. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to it next week, when we talk about Jonathan Sacks. Jonathan Sacks actually dealt with all of these issues, and he will have his way of answering the relationship between them. So it's not exactly the same, but that's a big issue, to what extent Judaism is for humanity as a whole, to what extent Judaism is really about the particular experience of the Jews, and it's Judaism for Jews. In a sense, Schachter-Shalomi and also Sacks, Schachter-Shalomi is saying Judaism is for all human beings. There's a message here, there's a depth here that needs to be shared by all people. Okay, so far so good. You're with me? You see where we're going? Okay, biography. So I'm going to keep the same style. I know there's no way you can see all that. I will just highlight a few points here. But when you get the full deck of the slides, you can look at it more carefully. But the key, what's the story here? We have a person who was born in Poland, but as a child, the family, when he was 1 year old, the family moved to Vienna. Now, that's going to be very important. The fact that he was educated in Vienna and went to a particular school, I think that the whole story of his life is really the school where he studied as a teenager in Vienna. But anyway, he is moving to the Jewish neighborhood, Leopoldstadt. By the way, this is the neighborhood where Freud grew up, also Adler. Morris Adler did, sorry, it's not Morris. What's the first name of Adler? It escapes me for a minute. It will come to me. But Adler was there also for a few years. So it's very important that he grew up in a Jewish environment. So he goes into this Jewish gymnasium. It's a gymnasium, I'll show you, if you look at this in the Vienna section of this slide. It's a Jewish gymnasium that was really a unique combination of Zionism and socialism and humanism. It's quite unusual. So my point is that when he grew up, he was open, very open from the early years on to mix. It's not just mix and match, it's really integrating things which normally we keep apart. So actually, when he grew up, he wanted to be a chemist. His original idea was, I'm going to be a scientist, and chemistry was the area. In the afternoon, he would study in a modern Orthodox school in a yeshiva, Yesodei Torah yeshiva. So he's combining Zionism, socialism, orthodoxy, and the humanistic tradition of Europe. So that's quite unusual. So we'll go back here. The family, after when Austria fell to the Nazis, the family left. And if you read his biography, which I have here with me, if you're going to have one book by Schachter-Shalomi, I highly recommend his autobiography, My Life in Jewish Renewal. And that tells in great detail, actually, how the family escaped from Vienna to Antwerp in Belgium. They were smuggled, which was an incredible story. Actually, you'll read it in the book. The interesting thing that in Antwerp, he's going to be exposed, he's going to find his way into a group of Hasidim. So he did not grow up as a Hasid. He was not a member of Chabad, even though his father was a Chabad, a Belz Hasid, another dynasty of Hasidism. But it's actually his exposure to Chabad style of Hasidism, Chabad branch of Hasidism, is in Antwerp. And what he was doing during the war, he actually learned to engage in diamond polishing or whatever, in the diamond industry. It's a fascinating story how he survived those years. And he's also exposed to other Orthodox youth, modern Orthodox youth in Antwerp. All this is good, but then the Nazis, of course, gain control over Belgium and the Netherlands. The family moves to France. It's a very complex story. I won't get into the details because we can spend a lot of time, but basically they managed to get visas to the United States. They come to the United States via North Africa and the West Indies. 1941, he ends up in New York, and in New York he's going to study at the Chabad yeshiva of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He actually met the person who will become the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe in one of the internment camps in France. So Hasidism is a way that is not going to define who he is. So he comes from, imagine all those things, you know, about Zionism and socialism and modern Orthodoxy, and now he's going to become a Hasidic Rebbe. That's what happened in 1947. He's sent out, and maybe some people remember those days, he's sent out to colleges all over the United States. And in the United States, he's going to introduce Hasidism to students in colleges. And the person who did it with him was Carlebach. Who remember Carlebach? Shlomo Carlebach? Remember Shlomo Carlebach and Schachter-Shalomi introduced Hasidism to American youth, and they introduced not just Hasidism, they introduced a whole way of being Jewish. Okay, so it's totally different than what other Jews were exposed to in the 50s and 60s and so on. Anyway, the important thing that is he's going to make his career as a Hillel director, primarily in Canada. In Canada, he's going to create, eventually he's going to create what will become the foundation of what later will be called the Jewish Renewal movement, but it started as a fellowship. And you cannot understand Schachter-Shalomi without understanding the culture of the 1960s. Some of you probably remember it, right? 1960s, the kind of creativity, the kind of search, mystical kind of spiritual quest that was going on. He was very much part of it. He created the fellowship. Later on, the fellowship will change its name from Bnei to Pneo. That has to do with feminism. Bneo is kind of a masculine word in Hebrew. Pneo, with the faces of God, that's a more neutral word. But never, the important thing is that he's going to create basically what you can call New Age Judaism. I'll tell you more in the coming slides. So we are dealing here with a person who is very creative, very innovative, and my goal this lecture is to show you in what way that was the case. So maybe we'll go through this briefly. These are some of the stages of his educational growth. The point is that kind of on the way, so to speak, throughout life, he was basically constantly studying. So it's not like a regular student who goes to university, gets a degree, and then a PhD and all that. Here, his PhD, which was actually Hebrew doctor, kind of how is it called? Yeah, Doctor of Hebrew Letters from Hebrew Union College. That was done while he was actually working in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, sorry, and creating all sorts of institutions and new ways of being Jewish. So my point is, keep in mind that, yes, he's going to get a PhD. Before that, he got an MA in psychology. But this is not the traditional way of a person who gets a traditional philosophical training. So here, that's a list of some of his texts. I have many of them here with me. If you're going to choose what to buy or what to read, so one is the autobiography. And the other one is this one. It's Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, Essential Teachings. This is a selection of, paragraphs or pages from various books. And it has a very good introduction also to each section. It's, I would suggest the best way to, if you want to know his thought, this is the way to do it, all in one book.
What was that one called again, Hava?
Say it again?
What was that book called again?
The book is called Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, Essential Teachings.
Thank you.
Okay, and the two, I'll show you the two people who put the book together that's coming up. But basically, you can see just by looking at the slides that he was not like a regular professor of philosophy. Most of his books were written with other people. These are not systematic books, definitely not philosophical books, but they have a lot of wisdom. That's my point. There are a lot of wisdom, a lot of depth, and a lot of good ideas that people can benefit from reading. But perhaps because he did not write systematically, maybe some people will even have an issue with me. Why did you choose him to put on this list of philosophical examples? Okay, here are some of his books. So the book I just showed you is the one in the middle. That's the one I liked. And the way I organized this, you obviously don't need to remember anything here, but you can see that the 3 books on the left, I don't know how to do the clicker so I can show you. No? Okay, so the 3 books on the left are basically books on Hasidism. So he explains what Hasidism is for the American reader. And of course, he popularizes it. He makes it available. He makes things make sense. So it's not the kind of Hasidic text that one would write, that one would read if one were a Hasidic, an adherent of Hasidism or a person who really lives the Hasidic life. But this is really what Hasidism tell you and why is it relevant to the life of a modern Jew in the second half of the 20th century. So, for example, this is his first book. So look at the title, Fragments of a Future Scroll, Hasidism in the Aquarian Age. Okay, Hasidism in the Aquarian Age, you can see the point. The point is, I'm going to give you wisdom that you couldn't get any other way, but that's the wisdom you're really seeking in the middle of this incredible spiritual quest of the 1960s. So those are the three ones at the top. The three at the bottom on the left are more systematic, not systematic, but they give you kind of a better way of what he stands for. So paradigm shift, I'll tell you more what that means in a minute, but also selection of text, selection of sections from other texts. Integral Halakha, I have it here, is a later book, kind of more systematic, but I'll tell you what integral there means. And the books on the right side of the slide, Spiritual Intimacy, that's basically his dissertation. And that's a dissertation, or it's based on his dissertation, and it's about the relationship between the Hasid and his Rebbe, and it's basically about pastoral counseling. What happens in that dynamic, and how complex and how rich and how intricate that relationship is about. And the book next to it, From Aging to Saging, I love that book because it's a book about how to get old with dignity and with integrity. And it's really everybody, I would say, who is my age or older should read the book. And if you're above 70, that book has so much wisdom in terms of how to live your life and live it Jewishly, but also deeply. And the other two books are for different kind of audience. It's how to be Jewish, kind of be Jewish with a soul, be Jewish with meaning, be Jewish in a way that is rich. So this is the kind of writings that he has done. There are more books, but obviously I didn't put everything on the slide. So just to give you an idea, these are some of the institutions that he created, that he was engaged with. So maybe just a quick word. So the Bnei Or Religious Fellowship, that turns to be known as Bnei Or Chavarat Shalom. Are you familiar with Chavarat Shalom? Does that name ring a bell? You know, a person in the end. Tell me, you know about it?
I've read some of his works, and one more book to recommend for the group that's very accessible. He didn't write it, but he was in it, is The Jew and the Lotus,
Yes.
by Roger Kamenetsky.
Yeah.
And it's very conversational, so it's very accessible because he's explaining Hasidus to a guy who has no background at all.
Yes, and we'll come to that relationship, not the book, not the Roger Kamenet's book, but you're right. So Chavarat Shalom is really the beginning of the Chavurah movement. And this is 1968. He created it with Arthur Green, other people, Lawrence Feynman, other people were there. It's absolutely, if you want to understand what American Judaism was about from the 1960s on, the chapter of Chavarat Shalom is really crucial. Aleph is basically a combination. This is what the Jewish Renewal movement is about. It's this organization. It's 1993 where it received that name, but it's a relationship between Schachter-Shalomi and Arthur Waskow. So Arthur Waskow, you'll see, we'll get to it toward the end of the lecture. I'll show you a picture of him, but the story of Jewish Renewal movement has Arthur Waskow. Rabbi Arthur Waskow is part of the story. Have you heard that name? Anybody familiar with Rabbi? You know, some people here know it. So there's a lot to know. And the last one you probably don't know, but was very involved in a Jewish Sufi relationship and created this kind of, I guess you can call it interfaith, but it's really more shared mysticism. The focus of that organization is on the writings of the son of Moses Maimonides. And the son was Avraham Maimonides, or Maimuni, and that is kind of a combination of Sufism and the kind of philosophical mysticism of the son of Moses Maimonides, how that can work together. I don't know much. I know a lot about Avraham Maimonides, but not a lot about this particular order. I need to study more, but it's very interesting. He's very big on it, on kind of Jewish and Sufi interaction. So not a lot of scholarship, amazingly, not a lot of scholarship was written about Schachter-Shalomi. There are a lot of people who continue his path and write about him and committed his life to his legacy, but in terms of scholarship, not a lot. So this is, if you're not familiar with this person, this is Shaul Magid, Professor Shaul Magid, who is currently at Harvard, just was appointed a few months ago, whatever. That's his book. Again, if you want to know about kind of how he analyzes where American Judaism is, this is a good book to read. 3 chapters, I believe, in the book, could be 2, but don't have the pages there, are devoted to Schachter-Shalomi. And what I'm going to suggest to you in this lecture is most of the issues were identified by Shaul Magid already, kind of in the context of what is American Judaism about. And what he's trying to show that Schachter-Shalomi created Jews, as he called it, for non-Jewish, created Judaism for non-Jewish Jews. Many Jews today are not really practicing Jews. How to bring Judaism to them, how to make sense of Judaism to them is the challenge for all educators. Schachter-Shalomi did it in his unique way, and Shaul Magid analyzes that quite beautifully. Now, these are 2 of Schachter-Shalomi's, if you call them disciple. The one at the top is Or Rose. Those are the 2 people who edited this book. So Or Rose is a rabbi, and the one at the bottom is Nathaniel Miles Yepes, who is also involved in this Jewish Sufi conversation. And these people have done a wonderful work in terms of the selection and the explanation of what Schachter-Shalomi was all about. So this will tell you that if you want to know about the history, the biography of this person, these are the people who can help you do it. So now we go into more theoretical stuff. Schachter-Shalomi it's all about spirituality. Now that's a difficult term, right? What is spirituality? I'm giving my way of making sense to it. If I were a sociologist of religion, I will give you a slightly different analysis. But it seems to me that when people talk about spirituality, they really talk about the inner life. Inner life means what I feel, what I aspire to, what I hope, my psychological difficulties, my sadness, my anger. That's all part of the inner life. So spirituality is about what we feel, it's about what we experience, but also what we do as a result of what we feel and what we experience. So it's not about arguments. Spirituality is not necessarily about argument. It's more about how do you interact with the world and how do you feel about the world, what's your attitude about the world. And if that's the case, so what's the difference between philosophy, theology, and spirituality? So I try to, in this slide, I try to kind of get to the heart of it. Philosophy basically clarifies things. Philosophy explains concepts, arguments, propositions, kind of makes sense logically. It's all about logos. Philosophy is about logos. Theology is not so much about logos, but it's about what you need to believe. What are we affirming when we believe? So we say we are Jewish. Well, what does that mean theologically? Well, so Jewish theology tells you what that's all about. And so that's kind of how I understand the relationship between spirituality, theology, and philosophy. In some ways, he's all of those 3 things, but he's primarily a spiritual teacher. Now, dimensions of spirituality. Spirituality is not just about what's in your head. It's also about your embodiment. It's about your body. So it's about your inner life, but it's also about sexuality, about eroticism, mystical literature, Doesn't matter which tradition you belong to, whether it's Christian or Hindu tradition or Muslim tradition or Jewish, the mystical writings are going to be filled with eroticism. And if you ask yourself why that's the case, not complicated to explain. It has to do with our desire for intimacy. So if we desire intimacy, the language is going to be either sexual or erotic, one way or the other. It's very hard for human beings to think about intimacy without that dimension. So it's all there, and there's a lot of artistic expression, and that's, in a sense, what's going on here with the Jewish Renewal movement that Schachter-Shalomi created, that bringing in art and the artistry and creativity into the way of being Jewish. The other two slides are kind of the other two things that I put on this slide, the relationship with spirituality and religion. You know, people in religious studies spend a lot of time arguing about that. This is one way of solving the relationship between religion and spirituality. I basically think that all religious traditions have spirituality in them. So it's not, I am religious, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. That makes very little sense to me personally. But look at the bottom, and you'll see that the percentage of people who declare themselves as I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, that percentage continues to go. Now it's about 22% of Americans say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Have you heard this expression? Spiritual, but not religious? Sociologists of religion spend a lot of time explaining what that is. This is an example of one kind of a book, but there are many books like that. So for me, because I'm an intellectual historian, I always take the historical approach. Spirituality to me is part of the Jewish tradition. And there was no period in the Jewish tradition, at least not since the 7th century BCE, when the book of Deuteronomy came into existence, in which there was no spiritual dimension. It's impossible to be Jewish without the spiritual dimension, I would say. But this gives you a little bit of kind of a layout of the various elements. And the elements here, I include both philosophy and Kabbalah and Hasidism and the Mussar literature. They're all part of Jewish spirituality. Some people would like to maybe disagree here with the way I put it, but to me, all of those are expressing a certain trajectory within the Jewish tradition. If you want to read two wonderful books, they're not new books, they're from the 90s, but they're excellent kind of studies of Jewish spirituality. The first volume is up to the 16th century, and the one, so pre-modern, and the other one that's on the left, and the other one is from the 17th century to the present. And that's terrific resource if you want to know about the Jewish mystical tradition, not just mystical, the Jewish spiritual tradition. So I look at spirituality as part of Judaism, not separate from. What you have on the right is a diagram. How many people have seen this diagram before? You all know this diagram. This is, of course, a diagram that expresses the structure of how Kabbalah or Kabbalists understood what is the inner structure of the divine, of God. This is kind of a map of the divine. I won't teach you that. Maybe a course on Kabbalah would be a good thing to do, but you cannot understand anything about Schachter-Shalomi, of course, without knowing Kabbalah, because Hasidism and definitely Neo-Hasidism are all rooted in the Kabbalistic tradition. So that's something to think about when we think about what else we need to know. But basically, these are all attributes of God. These are 10 attributes of God. They are divided within the masculine and the feminine. It's a dynamic system. It's a system that interacts with stimuli from the outside as well as internal relationship between the various forces. So Kabbalah is fascinating, and maybe that's for another course. But what's interesting about Schachter-Shalomi is that he was so open to other intellectual traditions. He really read everything in a sense. So he knows a lot about process philosophy. I don't expect people here to know about process philosophy, but process philosophy is very, very big in the it's really from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's very strong, of course, in Christianity. The idea is to think about God as a verb, as a process, as an activity. So he knows that stuff. or at least he's exposed to it to some extent. He's also open to postmodern science. He's one way of thinking about him is to look at him as a postmodern thinker. And in that sense, is quite different from Fackenheim. He's also very open to feminism. And you'll see, I'll show you additional slides. So if you look at and he's very open to psychology, he reads very, very broadly. And that's the meaning of the word integral. So when he has integral in whatever he does or whatever he writes, it means that he integrates all of those traditions. So are you willing to go a little bit into some ideas, some themes? Yes, you see how it's going. My point to you is to suggest that we are dealing here with a very open-minded person who is not arguing in a narrow sense within a particular philosophical tradition. He's kind of, he really is an inclusive thinker. You can call it the eclectic thinker, but I think that may not really get to the heart of it. There is a reason for this eclecticism or this inclusivism, and I'll try to explain. So intellectually, how do we locate him? He's basically a New Age thinker. You remember the New Age? You remember the 60s? It's really quite interesting. As a scholar of religious studies, I can say that I just finished a book, which is coming up in June, on Jewish environmentalism and the post-secular age. But the book actually began kind of the early analysis is the New Age, how the New Age movement really changed our understanding of the ecological problems that we are dealing with. So Schachter-Shalomi was part of it. He was smack in the middle of it, in a sense, and in many ways kind of created a Jewish response to the New Age, a revolution, if you wish, or at least turmoil. So that's his Judaism for the New Age. He's giving us Judaism for the New Age. Anybody belongs maybe to a Renewal movement, Renewal congregation? No? Have you ever been in Renewal? No, you have. I guess the answer is no. But I try kind of to summarize what it is. It's Judaism in a new key, if you wish. Or if you know music, you know what transposition is. You can take something in the major key and transpose it to another key, into a minor key. That's going on. So it's Jewish, but it's Jewish in a new way. So he periodizes Judaism differently, and he focuses on changes in conceptions, changes in the way we think about God, and tells the history of Judaism kind of in 4 major stages. He is going to tell us that what we need to do in the second half of the 20th century is to develop what he calls Gaian consciousness. That's ecological consciousness. Gaia is the goddess, Earth. So he's going to tell us, look, there's a real problem coming upon us. That's called the ecological crisis. He understood it perhaps ahead of other people, and we cannot ignore it. And he's telling us what does it mean? I'll show you, we'll come to it in a minute. He created new institution. That's a Jewish renewal movement in a sense. He created different kind of Jewish way of worship, focuses on joy, on exuberance, on excitement, on kind of emotional, everything kind of hangs out there, right? It's expressed, it's not tight, it's not suppressed, it's not, simple, square, so to speak. It's very different kind of experience. And the focus is on inter-religious dialogue, and you'll see a slide in a minute. But this is the kind of Judaism that you probably, if you belong to a Reconstructionist congregation, you probably would experience some of it. Many Reconstructionist congregations, have that elements in it. So he told this was the title of his book, but it's also a major concept. So basically what he's saying is, you can look at it also as a response to Fackenheim. After the Holocaust, we need a paradigm shift. But it's not just after the Holocaust, it's also after Hiroshima that introduced a new kind of, how shall I put it, mass destruction, possibility of mass destruction. Nuclear energy and nuclear armament was new. So after Auschwitz, after Hiroshima, after the ecological crisis, and then he's going to show us, I'll show you in a minute, a statement from him. After the internet, we cannot do business as usual. We have to think differently. We have to think differently about God, about the world, about ourselves, about our society. And if we don't do that, our Judaism will become flat, boring, and not meaningful. So what he's trying to do is really to renew Judaism from within. That's the idea. That's the paradigm shift. Does that sound revolutionary? Probably should, because it really is. Look at the last slide at the bottom on the right. It entails reorientation, reconstruction, restructuring, reformatting. Reformatting, of course, a language from computing science. And this is what he wants. You do business, but you do it differently. You have to reconstruct. And the language of reconstruction, of course, tells us that he's not so far from Mordechai Kaplan. Okay? It's all about rethink, but he thinks it's differently. He's not identical with Kaplan, but there was a lot of correlation between the two of them. So in terms of that's the book Paradigm Shift. And basically, we need to let go of old paradigms. We cannot think about God as an old man up in the sky and whatever, creating a ledger in which every person. This is the language of the prayer book, right? That allows us to think about God in ways which are inappropriate. So in a sense, he's saying you've got to think about it differently and more deeply and more creatively. And the key issue is to conceptualize God as a verb. God is not a thing. It's not something out there that you can do business with or be punished by or anything like that. So what he's telling you is that Judaism needs a new paradigm, a new way of being Jewish. So now we have a few examples of his conception of God. In a sense, it's all coming from Hasidism, but you can see, if you know process philosophy, you'll recognize elements of process philosophy in this paragraph here. So God is a verb emerging the universe. The verb emerging, look at that. It's not God is doing something to the universe. It's not God creating the universe. It's God emerging the universe. The universe emerges out of God. God is the source of all movement. So he speaks in terms of energy. Energy flows. And that is a language that he knows from quite a lot of work in physics, or people who do biocentrism. It will come up later on. But you can see that what he's telling us that we need to live, to be in one step, as he calls it. We have to recognize this energy and we have to live with it. Anybody who studies Buddhism or knows a little bit about Buddhism can recognize the Buddhist element here. Reality is what you need to be. You are part of it. But if you are not going with the real, if you don't understand how to relate to reality properly, that's when you suffer. So Buddhism is all about how do we get out of suffering. And the answer is, you've got to know what is. You've got to orient yourself. It's all about orientation. It's all about positioning yourself. It's about intentionality. So I won't get into that, but this is a typical way of Schachter-Shalomi speaking about God, and that's quite different from the way that Fackenheim, for example, thought about God. This is in the same place. The key issue with Schachter-Shalomi is to think about everything in more than one dimension. So we think normally one level. Everything is kind of just one story. But how about if everything is not one story in terms of floors, but 4 or 5 stories together? How can you think about reality in multi-dimensional way that happens simultaneously? So I only have 2 hands, but if I had 4 or 5 hands, you will see what he, in a sense, he has in mind. So look at the second sentence where he's talking about God as energy, but we are also, if we are, where we consciously and intentionally exist in harmony with it, if we're in harmony with this, we become energizers. So if you want to think, if you say yourself, okay, how do I renew Judaism after the Holocaust? That's his answer. His answer is become one with the energy of, in a sense, with the energy of the universe. He's going to call God the eye of the universe, the eye, even in some places, the soul of the universe. So when we have the divine in us, then we can become energizers. Then we can even reinforce it. This is a Kabbalistic idea. We call it theurgy, when the human being can actually influence God. So he thinks as a Kabbalist and as a Chassid. I won't get into it too much. If you want, you can ask about it. But this is how to think about God as a verb. And I bet you that most of you probably don't think about God as a verb, right? Most of us think, oh, God is a thing. God is something. We even put it in capital G, right? So I said, no, that's a wrong way of looking at it, because you make God into an object. You have to think about God differently, more in terms of energy. Think of it more in terms of a river, and you have to be part of that river. So, did I miss something? No, that's okay. Okay, so he was very big. In a sense, he's saying if you are mystically inclined, if you think in terms of God as he just showed you, you can be open to other spiritual teachers. Of course, you recognize the Dalai Lama there in two pictures on the right. The person on the left, the two of them, this is Schachter-Shalomi and Thomas Merton. He was very close to Thomas Merton. I'll give you a citation from his essay on my friend Thomas Merton. So Thomas Merton, in case you don't know, was a Trappist monk, a very important figure in Christian spirituality and the Christian monastic tradition. And between the two of them, there was an interesting relationship. I don't know the person, the Sufi person who is in the picture at the bottom, but this is just, I wanted to introduce you to it because he was engaged in not just with Christians, not just with Buddhists, but also with Muslims. And the idea here that spirituality goes beyond boundaries, beyond normal boundaries of religious tradition. So here's the sentence from his essay, My Friend Thomas Merton and the Ecumenical Quest. When those who fear God and honor his name talk to one another, those dialogues are so precious to God that God has a special book in which he writes them down. That's, of course, a metaphorical way of talking about it. So we enter into religious dialogue, and this is the key point here. We enter religious dialogue not by minimizing our differences, but by maximizing our devotion. So two people who are adherents of two different religious traditions can have a lot in common and can really understand each other. They have more that they share as spiritual people than what separates them, which could be on the level of dogma, for example. So he preached and he advocated what he called deep ecumenism. And if you look at this paragraph, at this citation, you can see what he considers the key elements that really changed the name of the game after the middle of the century, right? So the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the moonwalk, that's when we actually saw the Earth from above, from afar, from space, and the view of Earth from outer space, the hippie revolution, and the internet. These are the forces that brought about New Age Judaism. And now he's going to advocate a new, not just a deep understanding within traditions, but also what he would call the organismic view of life in the planet. We need to develop a whole new consciousness if we're going to survive on this planet. Why is that? You're all familiar with the ecological crisis. This is just one representation of it. I write a lot about this kind of issue, but Schachter-Shalomi was one of the early Jewish thinkers to identify the ecological crisis as a force, as a reality that really compels us to think differently about everything. So I just am curious, have you heard the word eco-Judaism or eco-Jews or no? Well, you heard it? Okay, from me, yeah. But yeah, he created that term, eco-kosher. Eco-kosher was created 1968, I believe it could be 69, during the grape boycott in California. And what was his name? Cesar Chavez, right? So he was very much pro-labor, pro the people who worked in the fields, and he created the concept of eco-kosher. We'll come to it in a minute later on, but it's all a response. And this is really the late 60s, early 70s, when the whole thing was just beginning. So this is it. It's kind of interesting how the picture really has the smoke coming up. All right, so he basically told us, okay, how are we going to survive? We are going to survive it, and we are going to deal with it by creating the new consciousness. He calls it Gaian consciousness. Gaia, the Greek goddess of the earth, the face of our living planet, represents a new emerging parzuf. Now, parzuf means face in Hebrew, and it's a Kabbalistic term, comes from Luriani Kabbalah. And it's, as he calls it, a new parzuf, of face of the ultimate core reality of the universe. So we need to think about the earth in a different way. We need to look at how the universe, or especially the earth itself, how it makes life possible, how it makes life, how the universe makes life possible, but as he calls it, the hospitable to life. And basically, the goal is to protect life. And if we don't protect life, we won't be able to live on this earth. And I must say that 100% I'm in agreement with that statement. So he understood it way ahead of other people. This is a longer citation where he talks about, when he introduces the concept of organicity. Everything is organically related. Everything is, you cannot think about the human being just about the head, just about the liver, just about the kidneys, just about, right? That's a non-organistic way of thinking. If you think like about an organism, in an organism, everything is tightly connected to everything else. So the blood system and the respiratory system and the mind, and not the mind, the brain, I should say, it's all connected. So he wants us to think in the same way about the planet, because there is this planetary totality that we are all part of. Does that sound interesting? Does that sound different? Right? Who would imagine that people will come up with these ideas? Well, they did. So now you've got a problem. Take care. Now you've got a problem, because in terms of theology, when he thinks about the earth, about the universe in this way, what is he doing here? If he's saying that God is everything and everything is God, then he's going to be accused, if you wish, or be labeled as a person who holds pantheistic view. God and the universe are one. That's called pantheism. Maybe I can ask you, who was the Jewish thinker who came up with that idea? Can you think about a Jewish thinker who advocated pantheism? Spinoza. That's right. Benedict Spinoza in the 17th century. And we all know what happened to Spinoza. Spinoza was excommunicated. So to say that God is the universe, that God and nature are the same, is very problematic from Jewish theology. And in a sense, that's one way of saying what he holds. It's kind of subtle. So look at the two diagrams, the difference between pantheism, you can see it at the top, God in the universe is all one circle, versus panentheism. Panentheism is that God is everything, the universe is part of it, but there's more reality than just what's in the universe. So whether he was pantheist or panentheist, that's a big debate. So he himself was not, sometimes he says specifically, I'm panentheist, other times it's a little bit more pantheism. But the point is that there is this integrity here. There is this wholesomeness here. That's what life is all about. But you can see that there's nothing irrelevant in the world. That there's, how did he put it? He put it nicely, better than what I was about to say. He says, in Hasidism, or his version, his theology, Hasidism denies nothing and embraces everything. So there's no dimension of the universe or life that is not suffused with God. God is everywhere, even in this room, even in this lecture. And you have to kind of find the divine in whatever you do, in whatever context. Okay, so that's a Hasidic outlook, if you wish, for you in a summary. Now, what he's going to do, he's going to use Kabbalistic language to explain the multidimensionality of reality. I'm not going to get into it because you need to know a lot more Kabbalah, but basically what he does is to take the language of medieval Kabbalah, which ended up in Hasidism of the 18th century, but give it a psychological spin, a psychological interpretation. So we have levels of reality. Each level of reality also has a level of consciousness, and everything he does is operating on 5 levels simultaneously, and that's very tricky or very challenging intellectually. But that's the depth of this culture, whether it's Hasidic or whether it's Kabbalistic or whether it's his version of Neo-Hasidism. That's why it's kind of challenging. If you were interested in science, I will tell you that some scientists, especially this guy Robert Lanza, but other people, Fritjof Capra, and the other people who developed this idea, and we call this notion, set of ideas, biocentrism. But the point is that reality is shaped by consciousness, not the other way around. So how we imagine reality, what he calls reality map, what kind of map we create in our mind, that is what enables us to interact with reality. So it's always the focus on the mind, the consciousness, on the inner. And these ideas come from Hasidism, actually, but not for these people. For these people, it has nothing to do with Hasidism, for Robert Lanza or Fritjof Capra. So if you want to ask me, okay, so what can we do with all this? Schachter-Shalomi also transformed American Judaism by focusing or by lending his support or his endorsement of feminism very early on. This woman is a rabbi. This is Lynn Gottlieb. She's a rabbi and very close to us. She's in New Mexico. And her book, She Who Dwells Within, takes the concept of the Shekhinah. You all know that word, right? The Shekhinah. And shows you how you can think about ecology and about other issues in a kind of how you combine feminism and ecology as she does. So I just gave a lecture on this very topic in another setting. I won't go in, actually it's in Edinburgh, but you can't really understand Schachter-Shalomi and not realize that he was very open to feminism because egalitarianism and recognized that the role of women was very important to him.
The same thing about the reference to goddess religion.
Okay, what's goddess religion? Nobody heard? What is that?
Can you just repeat the question?
Oh, the question is, what is goddess religion? So goddess religion is a feminist, it comes out of feminist spirituality, developed in the 1970s, early 1970s, actually even a little bit before. Certain elements of goddess religion. Have you heard about Wicca, for example? Okay, Wicca is an element in goddess religion. But the idea is that why are we talking about God as a masculine deity? Why not talking about God as feminine? So the fact that we have life always reproduces itself, right? So this reproductiveness, this activity is an expression of the goddess religion. So there's a whole story how the goddess religion was created. Actually, it comes primarily from England and then transplanted here. So it's going to take us too far away. But what she showed is how a Jewish rabbi can take the language of goddess religion, combine it with Shekhinah symbolism, and speak Jewishly about ecological matters. So it's a lovely book to take a look at. All right, so what's interesting here, and I want to leave some time for questions, but just I'll go through this quite quickly. Basically, he's telling all of us, look, we are today in a new situation. We don't have to be Jewish. If we're going to be Jewish, it's up to us. It's our choice, but we have to figure out how to be Jewish. So he's offering, as he calls it, a new approach to halakha that remains compatible with the past. So he doesn't want to ditch the past. He doesn't want to say, okay, rabbinic Judaism is not important. Absolutely not. No, it's all important. But you have to reinterpret it in a new way to figure out how to deal with the issues of the end of the 20th century or the 21st century. A lot of stuff is new. You can't do old business in order to deal with new problems. He's saying you've got to do business differently. That's kind of the gist here. So he calls this new thing integral halakha. That's the name of the book. I have the book here with me if you want to take a look. So you have to observe halakhic life. He's not saying be secular. That's not an option for him. But he's saying be open to all the scientific knowledge that there is out there, whether it's biology, psychology, anthropology. I could have put physics. I could have put other things as well. It was very well read, very open-ended. In that regard, very open to other tradition. And you have to deal with very concrete problems such as technology, such as the ecological crisis, and you have to both transcend it. I love that subtitle, Transcending and Including. That's a subtitle of his book. You go beyond, but you include everything. And you have to include especially all the aspects of being human. So it's a very inclusive way of thinking. And the last kind of book toward the end, the spiritual eldering, I mentioned it before, it's more kind of impacted by the Buddhist tradition and Buddhist way of aging. But I highly recommend that you read it. There are some terrific insights, psychological insights. And he was a psychologically trained person and also very open psychologically as a psychological thinker, as a teacher, as a spiritual influencer, if you wish. That's all comes from knowledge of psychology. So very briefly, and then we'll connect kind of, he created the Jewish Renewal movement. Of course, he's not alone, but they changed the energy and the level of the style, the energy, the inclusiveness of the way things are done in many Jewish congregations. It's not so different from many things that are happening in Reconstructionist Judaism. Today, they call themselves Reconstructing Judaism. It's part of the Chabad movement, or Hadara movement was kind of the impetus for this. So if you're not familiar with it, maybe you would go to a congregation that does belong to the Jewish Renewal movement. It's very different from what's happening in Reform congregation or in Conservative or in Orthodox or anything else. Okay. I want to just introduce you to three thinkers that if you want to know more, but kind of these are all his either friends or friends/disciples, if you wish. So Arthur Green, anybody familiar with that name? No, you know him? Yeah, okay. So Arthur Green, crucial. Arthur Green is included in the book at the top. That's part of the series that I did of 21 books on contemporary Jewish philosophers. And the first thing that he asked me when I interviewed him, he asked, why do you want to include me in the series? I thought I'm not a philosopher. So in a sense, he's right. There is a problem here, as I suggested to you. But I do think that Hasidism has to be understood also philosophically. There are other people who do it in a systematic way. Elliot Wolfson is one excellent example of a person who really understands the depth of Hasidic literature and can understand it also, explore it also philosophically. So Arthur Green is one example. Arthur Waskow, very important. He passed away just a few months ago. Very important person. And in my new book that is coming out, I kind of explore how he transitioned from being secular kind of political scientist to a person who is crucial and central to the Jewish Renewal movement. Of course, how he developed the Jewish environmental movement, the concept of eco-kashrut or eco-kosher, and all his books. He has many, many books, but a very important follower, in a sense, or promoter of the approach of Schachter-Shalomi. This is probably a person who is more known. You know Michael Lerner? Michael Lerner, to think about the political influence of this man is incredible. But look at the book. This is a book from 1992. It's called Jewish Renewal. So if you don't know about the Jewish Renewal movement, you think, oh, well, how did he come up with this idea? But once you know about Jewish Renewal, you know how to understand this particular book. And if you ask yourself today, why do we have so many problems in the political discourse? You can see the book, his last book, Embracing Israel-Palestine. A lot of Jewish progressives today share this view. So this is, a lot of his ideas come from Schachter-Shalomi. It's not just that. He was also psychologically trained and was also politically activist, very much a political activist. But these are some of the followers of Schachter-Shalomi. And if we look at Schachter-Shalomi as a response to Fackenheim, in a sense, he's doing something different. He's saying, okay, there was a rupture. The Holocaust was a rupture. We cannot do business as usual. Let me show you how Judaism needs to be done differently, right? That's, in a sense, he's doing something, but he's very different from Fackenheim, because in Schachter-Shalomi, the focus is not on Zionism. The focus is not on making Aliyah and settling in Israel. You can be a Jew in the diaspora in a mystically oriented way, kind of a New Age way, and you can call it maybe post-Zionist on some level. Now we can come to the kind of questions for the end. Where do we take it? Did I convince you that he was a philosopher? Did I convince you that he was interesting? Where do we go from here? And we can probably have questions from online. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious what kind of influence we see beyond just the renewal movement. I mean, have there been? It's all sounds good to me, but I wonder if we see it anywhere besides just within that movement. Has it affected the reform or the conservative? I mean, I'm thinking about now that we have instrumental music in our synagogue. Was that part of it? Was that a carryover?
Yes, chanting, dancing. Not so much the guitar, the music with the guitar, that's not necessarily the focal point. That's the reform movement that has the whole kind of trajectory of its own. But I think that the focus on exuberance and joy and excitement, and it's not it's not the traditional way of being in a synagogue, in a traditional service. So I would say yes, the Jewish renewal created a certain style, and the style is definitely in Reconstructionist Judaism. It's very much so. Reform Judaism also a little bit less. But so yes, it's not just reserved, I would say, for those congregations.
I do think there's been more of a focus on spirituality as I think about the last few years, but
Absolutely. I mean, look, we do have, so the question is, where are the Jews in terms of how do they define themselves? Are they spiritual but not religious? To me, to say spiritual but not religious doesn't make a lot of sense in Judaism, honestly. Or at least it's problematic. But a lot of people thought that yes, if there are a lot of maybe people who call themselves post-Christians who say, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious, meaning I don't go to church. New Age spirituality is what we call self-spirituality, so it's all focused on the inner life and who I am and how I feel and so forth. Some of it is neo-paganism. If you remember that slide, neo-paganism is a very big movement in the United States. Actually, it's a very fascinating thing. But anyway, so the answer is, the short answer to your question is yes, it has impact beyond its own movement. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, Michael.
I'm kind of curious. I didn't hear it here, and it's probably a whole different lecture. Nothing indicating concepts of good and evil. And where the Holocaust fit here, not just our Holocaust, the tendency throughout history, including the Armenian, including the other Holocaust, look at the world wars. And how does that fit in the context of what we're trying to look at the world and the center of it with God and everything else?
That's an excellent question. And I don't know that I have an excellent answer. In other words, I actually, in a sense, if you have I'll start from the point of view of Hasidism. If you think in a Hasidic way in a Hasidic mindset, it's all good. Everything is good. God is everywhere. So evil, yes, so your question is, what about the reality of evil? Kabbalah had an answer to it, but Hasidism, in a sense, goes beyond Kabbalah by saying that there are ways to dealing with evil, and that's the way is internal. It's psychological. It's about our how do we position ourselves. So he doesn't deny that there is suffering. I don't think he denies that. But he doesn't give you, I think it's fair to say, but I'll look into it a little bit better. I don't think he talks about the reality of evil, which does exist in Kabbalah. In other words, because of the focus on psychology rather than on mythic realities, he doesn't talk very much about that because it's all in here. If I change in here, I can change the way I relate to life. Yes, go ahead.
We talk about Spinoza, and for Spinoza, God was nature,
Correct.
and that was it.
That's right.
And he was thrown out of
Correct.
Jewish religion.
Yes. Out of the community of Amsterdam. Yes, he was. You want to repeat it so people online can hear you?
He lived there for the rest of his life.
Yes, but he lived outside the Jewish community. After Spinoza was excommunicated, he basically refuses to convert to Christianity. He's the first Jew who is neither a Jew nor a Christian. And he's saying, I'm going to do my science on my terms in a particular way, and I'm going to live unaffiliated. He's the first unaffiliated Jew, if you wish.
I like him.
You like him, yeah. Spinoza was just that the relationship between Hasidism and Spinoza's philosophy is actually quite complicated. Solomon Maimon, a very interesting character, a philosopher who was for a while in a Hasidic Hasidic court, actually said that Hasidism is a variant of Spinozism, in a sense that he understood the conceptual affinity between Hasidism and Spinozism. But it doesn't tell the full story. So Hasidism is Jewish in a way that Spinoza couldn't be Jewish, even though they can agree on the pantheist element of it, but in terms of how you live and what you do, Spinoza, there's no more kosher, there's no Shabbat, there's no Chagim, there's none of that, right? So you can be a Jewish pantheist, but something will happen as a result of that commitment, which didn't happen for Spinoza. So Spinoza basically said, we don't need the whole operation of Judaism.
Which one?
What do we have from the online?
Okay, so there is, I think, one question. Was Karlbach influenced by Schachter-Shalomi? It seems like his style of service were often exuberant and perhaps renewal-ish. Renewal, yeah.
Yes, very much. They worked together in the 50s and early 60s. They did a lot of things together. So they're influencing each other. Also, Schachter-Shalomi was influenced by Karlbach, as much as Karlbach is influenced by Schachter-Shalomi. And they're both coming out of this Hasidic milieu and moving in a sense beyond it. So yeah, the impact of Jewish spirituality on contemporary Jewish life is unmistakable. What else do we have there?
That's really it for the questions. Yeah, that's really it. The rest are just comments. Oh, wait, maybe one more. Hold on. Oh, can you talk a little bit more about Neo-Hasidism, and then we'll end for the day.
Neo-Hasidism is, in a sense, Neo-Hasidism is what Schachter-Shalomi, and especially Arthur Green, and the student of Arthur Green, because he has students too, they're trying to do several things at the same time. A is to make Hasidic text available to American readers. So you make Hasidism available in English. That's a big thing because Hasidic texts were not written in English. Most of them originally were not written in English. So the first operation is, how do I make certain texts available? Second level is how do I interpret what Hasidism is about? So I have to teach history of Hasidism, Hasidic theology, Hasidic psychology, but I have to do it in a new way. So for example, a good example of what Hasidism is, Arthur Green published the works of Hillel Zeitlin. Hillel Zeitlin was a very interesting, died in the Holocaust, but a very interesting thinker, and just making Hillel Zeitlin available to Americans is part of what New Hasidism is. It's also, the two books, if I go back, I have to go back to that here. A New Hasidism, those are two volumes of resources, and basically everything that Arthur Green stands for is to be a contemporary New Hasid. So you have to know Hasidism, but it's not Hasidism of the 18th century or the 19th century. It's Hasidism of the 21st century. Okay, so that's what New Hasidism is about. How do I update? How do I reconstruct? How do I make sense? How do I interpret? And the books at the bottom, the three books at the bottom of the list, that's his explanation or exposition of New Hasidism. I hope that helps the person who puts the question through. You have another question there?
That's it.
So kind of to wrap it up, if we go back to the last thing, the question for you, if you think about it, kind of, is it meaningful? Can I do anything with it? Can I read more about it? Is it interesting enough? How does it help me as a Jew in the beginning of the, right? We are in the third decade of the 21st century. What do I do with it? Or is it just kind of a historical anecdote or historical curiosity? That's the challenge. So obviously, a lot of people, I'm talking about hundreds and thousands of people, do think that Schachter-Shalomi really represent a way to be a Jew in the 21st century, and they continue it. The question is what people in the room do or what people online do. That's, of course, up to each one of us to figure out. But maybe the second question from the top is, does Schachter-Shalomi change our understanding of Jewish philosophy? And I hope that I convince you that, yes, this is different because it's much more experiential. And if I ask you, who is the most like? Who are the Jewish philosophers who are closest to him? What would be the answer? I would say the answer would be Buber and Heschel. So Schachter-Shalomi really has a lot in common with Martin Buber, Abraham Joshua Heschel, but he was also doing his own thing, which is not identical with Buber. But that's why I taught Buber last year, because Buber is crucial to our contemporary situation. So that's going to be a topic for next week, next Thursday, and hopefully people will join us both online and in person, and you'll see how a systematic philosopher, basically that's Rabbi Sachs, who was the chief rabbi in English Jewry, but only to the Orthodox community. So he's the chief rabbi of the the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth. But Reformed congregations were not part of his authority, but that doesn't matter. He became the most important and most influential thinker in the second half of the 20th century and early part of the 21st century. So I will see you all next week. All right. And thank you all for joining us online.